Signal Sciences is the industry's first web protection platform that works in any cloud, any container, any platform as a service, and any modern application architecture. The Signal Sciences web protection platform can be deployed in next-generation WAF, RASP, or reverse proxy modes, giving customers ultimate flexibility and coverage. Protect your web applications with Signal Sciences web protection platform. Signal Sciences, protecting applications, connecting teams. For more information, check them out at signalsciences.com/PSW. Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/ASW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter.
Welcome back, everyone, to Application Security Weekly. I could suddenly hear myself there in the background for some reason. Anyway, Paul, a lot of news going on this week.
Keith, what is that in your water bottle you're drinking? Is that whiskey? Hold that up for the audience.
This is
it's definitely whiskey. It's whiskey.
It's not whiskey. It's actually green tea. So I drink Crystal Light Peach Green Tea during the days. Though if you catch me on Paul Security Weekly, that glass that you see is in fact whiskey. Yes. So this is not whiskey.
It looks like whiskey.
You know, every now and then I get on a work call and I worry a little bit about drinking from my water bottle just for exactly that reason. Because in my mind, I'm like, people are going to think this is whiskey. It's not whiskey.
Or urine. You know. One of the two.
Yeah, you know, I lost a bet and, well, here we are.
You can drink it once. That's it. Once is the... So if you're ever stranded in the woods or in the middle of the ocean, you can drink your own urine once. That's a friendly tip for our listeners. You can look it up. Science backs it up. Just once.
You know, Paul's probably tried this. He believes.
I have not tried it. No.
Testing model.
I have not tried it, but there was. Anyway,
duly noted.
It's a long story. Someone in my extended family. There were stories of. Anyway.
Moving on. Paul, what news did you want to start with this week? There was a pretty bad Oracle patch that came out.
Let's talk about Oracle. I mean, here's what I don't understand, Keith. And I'm just going to kind of go out on a limb, right? We looked at Equifax, right? And a lot of major organizations that are using Oracle in some capacity, and typically it manifests itself into some kind of custom web application, usually written in Java, and usually running JBoss or Jakarta, or what was Equifax running? I always blank on.
Struts too.
Struts, thank you. But which is that's more of like a framework, right? For Java. And so we see organizations implementing Oracle. We know that they don't necessarily patch Oracle all the time because of a whole host of reasons that we've covered on various segments and webcasts on business critical applications. But what I found, what was striking to me when I look at the Oracle, the Equifax case, in a lot of similar cases to that, is that many of the traditional development teams that are developing these business critical applications that are using Oracle and using things, you know, like the Java frameworks, aren't doing DevOps, dude. And so patching becomes this like heinous thing that we've struggled with for so long. If they were to move in the DevOps direction, the newer versions of Oracle or whatever web framework you're using are automatically getting tested organically in your process. And so you're able to keep these technologies up to date more easily. Now, I'm not going to pretend to believe I'm an expert in applying DevOps practices to these major, you know, business critical applications that are using Oracle. There's obviously some challenges there, right? I mean, we've seen challenges with virtualization and cloud in that environment as well. Assuming we have similar, probably a whole host of other challenges getting DevOps into the mix. But the thing that strikes me the most, Keith, is that it can help solve the problem. I mean, this is one of the huge takeaways I got from DevOps was I don't have to get stuck with older, vulnerable versions of my operational infrastructure. And that's exactly what happens in the case when you're doing Oracle. And I don't know if you, Keith, have you looked at this technology and said, like, why or why not they're applying DevOps? Is it a culture thing? I think that ties into it, certainly, but there's other factors.
So in my mind, I think there are a number of companies that are doing DevOps that are, in fact, using Java as the main language. But with that being said, I don't think that they're using, or if they are using, they are readily testing frameworks, right? So Struts 2 being kind of the key example there, right? So in my mind, it comes back to good test-driven development, good unit testing, good integration testing, good regression testing, as you might call it, Paul. And then determining via build pipelines if, in fact, the application works the way it's supposed to. Now, that is all assuming that the company that is doing this, test writing has good code coverage. That's the other problem here.
Oh, I think you're right.
And if you think about, like for companies that have done, Java development for decades, they probably haven't been doing test-driven development, right? So now you got to ask them to write all these tests.
Their testing process takes months, right? And and if their development process and test processes and deployment processes aren't aligned, you can do DevOps all day long. If it still takes 2 months to run through all of your regression testing or your user acceptance testing, then your development process is stuck, and you're not going to make much headway to problems like this of updating your operational infrastructure. Because, let's face it, if you're going, I'm going to update my framework to the latest version in this next build cycle, and I'm going to update a bunch of code to support that change, that's going to take time. And then now I got to flip it over to my users and get some acceptance testing, which I think is usually a phase when you're in these larger business critical applications. I think it's certainly different from other kinds of development, such as I've got a public facing application that, I know I can run through my test cases more easily.
Yeah, and that comes back to the point that you're trying to make, Paul, which is a lot of these Java applications are compiled software that, someone has to go out and actually update or patch or whatever in the software itself, right? Like they're not just getting it served up to them on a web platform, which at the end of the day is, much more of a DevOps process than anything else.
And many are, and it's still hard because there's so much functionality baked into it. There's a lot of dependencies. There's a lot of integrations with that software, enterprise software, with other enterprise software. I mean, this software is hugely complex. I think I don't know why it's more challenging for this software versus, a younger company, not even a startup, that has a public-facing application that is their business. I feel like they're better poised to do that. Maybe because the software is newer and they don't have to worry about as much legacy. I think that certainly plays into it.
That's definitely a part of it. And that's not to say that there aren't platforms written in Java, right? There definitely are. And there are, microservices architectures associated with those applications. And those companies that have that tend to do pretty well, right? Like Java developers are pretty easy to find because every college under the sun still seems to teach it. But yeah, with this specific update, so that was story number 300, bugs, breaches, and more. It's 334 new security vulnerabilities. I wanted to call out that most of them, and these are like, the kind of risk matrix discussions that they have, are remotely exploitable without administrative access. And it's strongly encouraged, especially if you're using WebLogic, to go ahead and patch soon, because apparently the WebLogic bugs associated with this specific patch had a POC that was published on GitHub and are now actively being exploited in the wild by malicious actors.
Well, and here's the other thing. Covering updates from Oracle as an example for the past, almost 14 years now, they almost always release it as one big lump, like waterfall style development. Here's all your 300 patches. Like every time I've covered an Oracle patch cycle, it's not very often. And when you do get it, it's hundreds of patches. And that just is counterculture to the way DevOps is, teams are operating today. Whereas if you told me about those as we went, we could fix those as we go in our agile process and our DevOps process. And so I think there's a definite cultural disconnect here.
Oh, yeah. I mean, one of these for, let's see, which one was this? Because it was the Oracle Financial Services application. I highlighted as I was going through this that it is a fix for CVE 2014-3577.
And there you go.
Also addresses CVE 2015-5262. That is 4 and 3 years old, respectively. And they're just pushing patches for those vulnerabilities right now.
Yeah.
What? So, yeah. Oracle, for a lot of reasons, is not one of my favorite organizations, among other reasons because they write Java, and I'm not a huge fan of writing Java myself. But, yeah, basically remotely exploitable vulnerabilities without authentication almost everywhere. Something like, I don't know, some large number, I think it was in the hundreds of these are actually exploitable remotely. And it says it in the article itself. So that's just not good. Meanwhile, other companies, speaking of which, that are just doing not good things. Did you catch this Venmo article at all, Paul?
No, what is this about?
So Venmo is like a payment processor that you can use on your phone. You can send money between people and leave a little note or what have you.
I think I have seen that. Okay.
And so what ended up happening here was a researcher, and by a researcher I mean like someone that was doing collegiate research, right? Not like a security researcher. Basically tracked something like 200 million public Venmo transactions because the individual user's security settings are public by default. And it was this researcher was able to go ahead and look at all of the transactions, including monetary amounts sent between people based on their Venmo account, and the messages sent between those people. I just can't even. Like, I don't know what to say about this, Paul.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a good situation at all.
Yeah, effectively, I mean, we have another article in here that we can talk about in a little while. But one of the things that this researcher speculates is that people like health insurers could grab this data and try to determine the habits of the individual based on what they're paying for. There was one individual in here that they specifically cited had 965 transactions for sodas, alcoholic drinks, fast food, and sweets in 8 months. So, of course, that person would be readily flagged as, being a health risk by an insurance organization. So, in my mind, it's just like, why publicize it, and why were you lazy about the fact that,
or that's just that's just grandma watching the grandkids,
fair, you make a good point. It's funny that you mentioned that, because I was babysitting my niece and nephew this past weekend, and my wife and I were definitely that aunt and uncle giving them like whoopie pies and pizza. And,
right, because you send them home to their parents, and you're like, good luck with them sleeping tonight.
The best part is we were actually at their place while they were out, so it's like we didn't even have to send them home. We just left.
Just left. Like, I'm out. Like, they had like 6 whoopie pies each and 4 sodas. See ya.
Yep, exactly. It was, needless to say, we were there long enough for them to try and go to bed, and it was not pretty. We made a big mistake. So lessons learned.
It never is. Anyway, I think that kind of brings up the issues with, developers in understanding risk, right? And the whole process you put behind not just security, but the integrity of your application and making it resilient, and how much effort you put into that, and not understanding the threat models and the far-reaching repercussions of some type of incident. And that's a balance that everyone plays today when you're developing software. You're going to do those threat models, hopefully before, sometimes during, and then hopefully you don't have to do them after this occurs, right? And understand the far-reaching effects that the kind of unreliability of your software has presented.
Yeah, well, I mean, and talk about unreliable software, right? So I wanted to move on to story number 3. Facebook investigates a data firm called Crimson Hexagon for breaching their, end user license agreements or what have you, to go about hoovering up more data. Basically, in my mind, the story is the same thing as we saw with Cambridge Analytica and others. Facebook has API. Facebook allows API to grab private user data, including conversations, etc., and then company abuses that API. For some reason, at this point, I'm not surprised, but at the same time, I look at this and every time I think to myself, Facebook is a global Fortune 100 company, probably like global Fortune 10, and somehow they still don't seem to have this right, nor do they have the telemetry around who was using this API. I don't know, Paul.
I think you reach a certain size as a company, and it's like next to impossible to be able to control the abuse of your API. You think about how challenging it is for a big company like Facebook, right? And certainly we've seen this with YouTube, and you see a lot of weird stuff when you're coding these various APIs. You run into a lot of weird shit that is basically that company trying to meter and monitor and control their API, and it can go in either direction. In this case, someone was able to abuse the Facebook API. In other cases, like I can, if I had $1 for like how many times our YouTube development and sometimes production channel has been taken down, suspended, or something bad has happened because we were testing some API functionality and we triggered some kind of an alarm, right? And so this is a very, very challenging problem from a false negative, false positive perspective for a lot of organizations. And I'm not giving Facebook and Google a free pass on this, but I think once you reach those sizes, it just increases the complexity of controlling how the users behave and then even write code inside your APIs. We have in testing our own APIs had our channel banned and bad things happen.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, testing APIs in production versus testing APIs in a staging environment. It's funny, You see me looking through the DevOps handbook because I'm literally looking for the page that talks about, things they should be doing in gathering metrics and data. Oh, here we go. Chapter 15 for any of you listeners that work at, Facebook, Google, or otherwise, talks all about gathering good telemetry and then, making sure you do a little bit of data science on it to determine when you should be getting an alarm and when you shouldn't be getting an alarm. So in my mind, this is a situation where they probably should just be building some telemetry around their API use, right? If suddenly you see the queries per second for one particular company goes up, 10 times what it traditionally does, and then they're asking for maybe additional API utilization that they've never really used in the past. This is what machine learning and artificial intelligence and blockchain was created for, right? Like, just be able to track these things.
The hard part from the developer perspective is doing the full scope of testing and understanding what that is, because as the developer, you don't know what the provider is necessarily looking for and flagging is bad. You don't know what their process is because they don't tell you. Because if they told everyone, then we'd come up with ways around it. At least that's the argument, right? So you don't know, how does YouTube look for content and pull down videos? That's a huge mystery. No one's going to publish a document that says, what the rules are, because then people would look at the rules and figure out ways to get around them to put adult material on YouTube or spam or some kind of malicious activity on YouTube. The APIs are the same way, dude. I don't know what the limits are, because if you, as an attacker, you knew what the limits are, you could write code that just flew right below the limits, right? Let's say you're scraping LinkedIn, for example. If you know what all those limits are and all those controls are, you're going to just go below them. So it's hard when you're developing a legitimate application to know what's going to trigger something bad. Like when I upload that 18th video in certain kind of time frame, is that going to trigger some negative action on the provider side? You don't know that because it's not in the API documentation. Some of it is, but a lot of it isn't.
That's true. I mean, and to that end, it's more of it's on the company's end to determine, what is normal use, what is machine use, and then what is an acceptable machine use versus unacceptable, right? Because humans can only input so many requests, so fast.
And that goes right to companies like Distill Networks that are doing awesome bot detection. I have to, if I were to venture to guess, I would imagine the larger providers are using some kind of technology similar to Distill to do that. Distill publicizes, who their current customers are that they can talk about. But when you're at a huge company like that, like a Facebook or a Google, you're absolutely looking for bot traffic. And whether you're using a vendor or whether you're doing some stuff on your own, that depends on who the provider is. But you absolutely have to take out some of that bot traffic. And that's another problem that as you grow is going to get exponentially more difficult.
Yeah, you become a bigger target, right? So suddenly people are trying to make use of your data set.
Oh my God. Can you imagine how hard that task is at Twitter?
Yeah, right?
Well, they're criticized for not doing a good enough job at it, but that's a huge job at Twitter is stemming off the bad use cases. And one of that is looking at what's a bot and what's not, and how do you determine that from a Twitter perspective and abuse of their API. There's maybe not so much as collecting data from it, but trying to create bogus accounts is a huge battle for Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of Twitter and data aggregation, though, interestingly, I don't know if you saw this, Paul, story number 200, the if you build it, they will come section. Microsoft, Google, Facebook, and Twitter are announcing a data transfer project that they've open sourced on GitHub. Don't know if you caught this at all.
No, so what does that mean, data transfer?
Yeah, so what they're looking to be able to do is they're allowing you to leverage, build tools and software to extract and back up data stored in social media profiles, et cetera, across the cloud. So now if it's in Google, Facebook, Twitter, or even Microsoft, it sounds like. So I don't know if that's, Microsoft Teams or Microsoft, maybe LinkedIn, I guess. That's the only thing that I can think of that would have any sort of social media presence nowadays. But it allows you to share that data across your environment. So it's almost like your data now becomes cloud agnostic, which I mean, as a developer, that might be useful because I can then do cross-cloud assessments of data sets to see if my inputs will be valid across multiple, social media platforms, for example. But this was weird to me for two reasons. It was weird because to some extent, these companies are competitors with one another. And the other thing is Amazon's not on that list.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was cool and weird all at the same time to me because I never thought any of those companies would want to work together to share data like this. Then again, they probably already have all the same data, right?
Pretty close, right?
So
you wonder there's got to be something in it for them to allow that.
Yeah, I mean, who knows, right? Also, we mentioned it a little bit earlier, and I wanted to highlight it here as well. Story number 3 under If You Build It, They Will Come was a really good piece on how health insurers are actually actively vacuuming up any public data that you present out in social media or otherwise to determine your rates. Because in this case, HIPAA doesn't allow them to do that, for medical data, but anything that you publicize up to and including that Venmo data is free game for them to start saying, okay, this person is probably going to be more expensive for us, so we can up their rate. This is a long article, Paul, but did you manage to catch any of this?
No, I think it's pretty terrible, though.
Well, I mean, didn't you speculate on just this problem on Paul Security Weekly, like, I don't know, several years ago at some point? I'm pretty sure not Kevin was involved in the conversation of, privacy and public data issues and artificial intelligence and machine learning. But
and how they relate to this, and how they relate to WAFs probably was Kevin's angle on that because he loves the WAF.
Indeed.
No, I did, and it might have been in the context of like IoT security as well.
Yeah.
And devices that report to social media that are IoT personal devices, your Fitbit tracker. My wife, actually, I bought her, this was a joke in one of my presentations a long time ago, that one year for Christmas, my wife asked for a treadmill. And so I bought her a treadmill. And then the year after that, she asked for a scale. So like I literally bought her a treadmill and a scale. But like she asked for them, like I wasn't be like, hey, I thought you could use a scale. To go with your treadmill kind of thing.
Oh man,
it's usually a bad idea. It's kind of like buying your wife the vacuum cleaner. Like don't do that. Which my wife has gotten vacuum cleaners as gifts as well, but they're the robotic kind. In any case, where was I going with this? Oh, the scale, health issues. If it reports your weight, like this, there used to be. I'm sure they still make them today. Scales that report your weight to social media, like your Twitter account. Like every day when you get on the scale, it would automatically tweet your weight, and it was a weight loss method. Like you were basically publicizing, like, I'm trying to lose weight, kind of thing. I don't know if it was effective or not, but certainly that could be used to validate your health insurance. Although, how do you validate the person's identity across social media? And then how do you validate that the data is real, right?
True. Well, and so what I imagine they're doing is a little bit of metadata scraping, a little bit of, machine learning on the language being used to determine that it's the same type of user, right? Does the person use an Oxford comma or not on a regular basis?
I mean, hopefully they're not analyzing video content. I don't know if it could be, say, non-smoker on my health insurance report, but just saying, like, for example...
Well, so they could be doing that, or they could even be doing audio scraping, right? Because that is machine readable, right?
Yeah,
so it's just the intonations of your voice. So, yeah, I mean, needless to say,
these are all fake cigars being smoked on the show.
I believe it.
I'm putting that out there so that they can scrape that.
Indeed. So yeah, this was by Marshall Allen at ProPublica. It's in conjunction with NPR. I imagine it's going to be a series, believe it or not. But when I saw this, I was like, man, this is like everything Paul predicted and more, which is both scary and sad. Speaking of video analysis, by the way, Paul, I wanted to cover quickly under Learning and Tools story number 1. So this is a link to someone's Twitter page because they are going to be open sourcing this little thing that they made. But it's an individual named Abhishek Singh, and he is I believe he can't speak, so I think he's mute, but he can hear. And so obviously he would have a problem using something like an Amazon Echo because he can't speak. So he actually taught Amazon Echo to understand, or Amazon Echo Show, which is the one that can like see you with the camera.
Yeah, I have a couple of those.
Read American Sign Language.
That's pretty cool.
So he can now ask questions of his Amazon Echo, and I think he published a skill on this. To then sign to his Echo Show, which I thought was really cool. So Abhishek Singh, awesome work. I thought that this was incredible. It's Learning and Tools number 1.
Yeah, and the Echo Show's okay as long as you like run through the settings and like turn off a bunch of stuff like calling and shit like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
it's still kind of creepy having the camera aspect of it, but.
Well, now it's not only just a wiretap in your house, but it's a full-on video camera.
Right.
So.
Right.
But interestingly, speaking or staying with Amazon for a moment, under number 2 for Learning and Tools, this was an interesting article on someone deleting all of their old tweets to social media using AWS Lambda. I thought this was actually pretty neat because they talk through how and why they're deleting old tweets, and then also some of the code that they wrote to do just that.
Well, they're deleting old tweets because of that. The director of one of the new movies that's coming out,
Guardians of the Galaxy 3.
Yes, thank you. Was fired for tweets he made like 10 years ago or something.
Yeah, so interestingly, I've been sitting on this Learning and Tools article since about April because I didn't know really when to talk about it. And then this whole event with the director of Guardians of the Galaxy 3 came out, and I said, now's the perfect time to talk about this, folks, because it's happening, which is sad and at the same time poignant, I guess. But yeah,
I guess the comments he made were really bad, apparently.
Honestly, I don't know what they were.
I think it was something like promoting pedophilia or something like that, like something really bad.
Yeah, I think it was related to rape. It is. Yeah. I do not condone any of their behavior, and I think that the actions that were taken are probably appropriate. But at the same time, if you worry about things that you say on social media, maybe you shouldn't say them, or you should delete them after a certain period of time. Then again, it's been stored by the web archive or Wayback Machine somewhere at some point, right? So it's there.
I'm also concerned that Guardians of the Galaxy 3 will suck as equally as bad or worse than Guardians of the Galaxy 2, which was pretty bad.
That would be a sad day.
It would be a sad. The other issues aside, just speaking about the film itself, I mean,
for our own interests, right?
They'd have to try pretty hard to make it suck more than 2, but 2 is pretty bad.
This case, we are literally the Roman crowd in what was that movie with the Gladiator. Right? So we are not entertained in this case.
I was gonna say Toga's. Was it Animal House? Never mind.
Close. And next time I'm gonna show up with a shirt that just says college on it.
That's it. There you go.
I also wanted to highlight under Learning and Tools number 3, by the way, specifically because Joe Garcia was on the show, GitRob, which steals secrets and other key information out of your GitHub public repositories, is now available in Go. So yeah, it's now faster and more malicious. So you probably should get some secrets management up in your process because people like me on bug bounties, we're going out and basically robbing all your keys and reporting that for monies, which is really nice.
And I think this is a vulnerability management tactic too. Like you should be doing that on your own, and having an alert. Like someone should get an alert in operations and security or developers that say, by the way, you just published a key to GitHub. Bad. Shame on you. Get it out.
Right. Well, it's almost too late at that point. It's like rotate it.
Yes, you have to get it out, and then you're right, Keith. You have to rotate it. Absolutely.
So I did want to cover just 2 things under food for thought really quick. The first was that in this case, there was an interesting little discussion on turning your phone to grayscale will help you fight off phone addiction if you just can't turn it off. which I thought was kind of neat because it takes away some of that visual impact that you get with modern screens today. So I thought that was cool. The last one I wanted to cover, though, Paul, before we talk about the commit strip comic, was the article by Adrian Sanabria around when to purchase a solution for your security problems. So this was a pretty cool article. I don't know if you managed to read any of it, but it came out last week. And he's got a nice little flowchart and a discussion on things you should think about when you're purchasing a solution. Did you happen to catch any of this? I know that it was a week ago now that it came out.
No, I haven't read Adrian's article yet. I know we've also talked a lot about how tall you need to be to ride the ride is how Michael used to frame it. And they didn't like that so much because it wasn't resonating, he felt. And he said, like, when are you ready? And that's a question that we ask of vendors is basically, so in your customers, like how tall they need to be to ride the ride, or when do you believe that a customer is ready for the solution? Like what other things maybe need to be in place? And that's not always obvious. Like, sure, you could say, well, if you have a source code repository system, then you should implement something like a black duck or white source or something. Like there's obvious things. But I think the harder things to pin are based on two things, like your process, how your team works, or how your teams work together, and then like overall maturity, right? And that's a hard thing to quantify. And what I found is that if we look at the pen testing side, that they're already screening all of their clients for a maturity level, right? And making recommendations based as such. And that's not always just like an easy like checkbox, like, oh, do you have a firewall? Like, do you have this? Like, do you have, it's like, you have to ask very specific questions to ascertain the culture and the maturity level of maybe your development organization, as we talk about in this show, or just your overall security posture. We're kind of doing the same things, kind of inside baseball with the sponsors and partners that we work with. Like, what is the maturity level that allows them to have the best experience? And how does that guide them into a specific program? So to turn to the pen test thing, like if you're going to get a web app pen test, one of the maturity things is like, have you done any security testing? Have you done security awareness? Like what are you doing? And there's a whole line of questioning to determine their maturity level. And that might then determine like, maybe you need this solution first, maybe you need this test, and what type of testing do you need? And what should the goals and expected outcomes be of that test align with your current maturity model? So that's what this article kind of got me thinking about. And Adrian and I have had a lot of conversations around that. So he is definitely an expert in this area, and I encourage everyone to read the article.
Oh, for sure. I mean, and he goes through kind of the process of like, do you need to buy it? Do you already have an existing solution that can do, what you need, and you just haven't stopped to think about it?
Yes.
And so that was really poignant, I think. And then the other side of it as well, which was a really great discussion this past weekend. So Chad Loader, founder or one of the co-founders of Rapid7, before he departed, and he now does Habituate, I believe, had a really good kind of lengthy thread on that exact problem, which is he became a CISO, and then suddenly he realized, look, I can't even buy vulnerability management yet because we're not even ready for it. So it was interesting to kind of sit back and read that, especially someone myself that has worked in kind of the vendor space and now works in the enterprise. I can see exactly a lot of those points. Lastly, just before we jump out, we have another commit strip article. It is related to IT project estimates for both those security and, of course, developer folks out there that are thinking about, hey, we have to estimate, when we're going to get these things done, and perhaps a bit of what that feels like. So with that, I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us this week for another episode of Application Security Weekly. Remember to git commit and stay classy.